What shapes a man's voice? Talent, tragedy, or conviction? And what happens when that voice refuses to bow, even after life strikes its hardest blow? Luciano's journey is not just a story about music. It is a story about belief under pressure, about identity tested by fire, about a voice that refused to be reduced to entertainment when it was born to carry a message. For those of us who have watched reggae rise, splinter, commercialize, and sometimes drift from its roots, Luciano's life reads like both a warning and a promise. A warning about what can be lost. A promise about what can still endure. But how does a child from a quiet rural parish grow into a global spiritual ambassador? And what does it cost to remain conscious in an industry that often rewards compromise? Let's begin where all strong stories begin, at home. A childhood without screens, but full of sound. Luciano was born Jepther McClymont in Davyton, Manchester Parish, Jamaica. Seventh of 9 children. A house full of voices, chores, scripture readings, and discipline. The McClymont household was firmly rooted in Seventh-day Adventist faith. There was no television. No secular distractions. No late-night dancehall rhythms drifting through the yard. Just church, school, and the steady hum of the radio. Can you imagine growing up in a world where your imagination had to supply the pictures? Where stories arrived not through glowing screens, but through sound alone. For young Jepther, the radio was a portal. He would sit quietly, absorbing harmonies and rhythms, studying the cadence of singers who seemed to speak directly to his spirit. Without television to dominate his attention, music became his cinema. Songs painted landscapes in his mind, fields of struggle, streets of resistance, and heavens of hope. His father noticed something early. There was focus in the boy's eyes when music played. At age 10, he bought him a guitar. It was a simple instrument, but in that small act lay a turning point. The guitar wasn't just wood and strings, it was permission. By 11, Jepther was writing songs. Not nursery rhymes. Not playful jingles. Songs. He was already listening deeply to Dennis Brown's Sweetness, Bob Marley's Conviction, and Burning Spear's Fire. He studied how Brown could make sorrow sound tender. How Marley could wrap protest in melody. How Spear's voice carried the weight of history. But within that strict Adventist home, another current was quietly forming. The forbidden flame. In Davyton, community elders carried stories older than church doctrine. One of them, a Rastafarian known as Ras Living, became a quiet but powerful influence. Ras Living spoke of Africa, not as a distant continent, but as origin. He spoke of identity, pride, and resistance. He offered young Jepther ideas rarely discussed in Sabbath school. What happens when a young mind encounters two competing visions of truth? The church taught obedience, salvation, structure. Ras Living spoke of liberation, heritage, and consciousness. Neither felt entirely false. Both stirred something real. One afternoon, young Jepther drew a Rasta figure holding a chalice, a symbol heavy with spiritual meaning. When his mother discovered the drawing, punishment came swiftly. The message was unmistakable. That path was forbidden. But sometimes resistance doesn't extinguish belief, it strengthens it. Have you ever noticed how the ideas we are warned against often linger the longest? How prohibition can transform curiosity into conviction? For Jepther, the tension between Adventist discipline and Rastafarian consciousness did not create confusion. It created depth. It forced him to wrestle with identity early. It taught him that faith is not inherited automatically. It is chosen, tested, and sometimes rebuilt. The film that changed everything. Then came a moment that would shift everything. The harder they come. When Jepther watched Jimmy Cliff's portrayal of struggle and defiance, something inside him crystallized. The film wasn't just entertainment. It was possibility. It showed a young man from humble beginnings confronting systems bigger than himself. It showed music as both weapon and salvation. What if your destiny could be glimpsed in someone else's story? That film told him that rural beginnings did not define limits. It told him that music could be more than hobby, it could be purpose. And purpose demands courage. Telling his family he planned to move to Kingston was not easy. Kingston represented opportunity, but also danger, unpredictability, and spiritual risk. The capital city pulsed with ambition. It could make you, or swallow you whole. Have you ever stood at the edge of security, knowing that staying safe might mean staying small? Jepther chose risk. Kingston, baptism by fire. Kingston in the early 1990s was a furnace of sound. Dancehall was surging. Bass-heavy rhythms dominated airwaves. Slackness lyrics competed with cultural commentary. Producers searched for hits, not sermons. Into this landscape stepped a young man with roots on his tongue and conviction in his chest. In 1992, he recorded his first single under the name Stepper John, a reggae interpretation of Ebony and Ivory. It barely made a ripple. Few noticed. The industry can be indifferent to newcomers, especially those not yet aligned with prevailing trends. How many promising voices disappear before they are heard? But persistence is a quiet form of faith. In 1993, everything shifted. Shake It Up Tonight climbed to #1 on the UK reggae charts. Suddenly, people paused. That voice, rich, urgent, tender yet commanding, felt familiar. It carried echoes of the Roots era many feared was fading. At a time when dancehall's dominance seemed unstoppable, Luciano reintroduced something deeper. Spiritual conviction. Conscious lyrics. Melodies that made you move while inviting you to think. Listeners asked themselves, had Roots reggae returned? Meeting Fetus Burrell, a crucial alliance. Every movement needs alignment between vision and structure. Luciano found that alignment in Philip Fetus Burrell of Exterminator Records. Fetus didn't just see a singer. He saw a standard-bearer. Their partnership ignited what many now call the Rasta Renaissance of the 1990s. Alongside artists like Sizzla and Capleton, Luciano stood at the forefront of a resurgence that refused dilution. Exterminator Productions blended modern clarity with classic soul. The rhythms felt current, but anchored. In studio sessions, Luciano worked tirelessly. Dean Fraser's saxophone lines wrapped around his vocals like warm wind. Seasoned rhythm sections provided depth. Younger musicians brought hunger. But the question lingered, could conscious reggae truly compete in a market leaning toward commercial immediacy? Luciano's answer was simple: authenticity. The tragedy that changed the movement. Then, in 1994, tragedy struck. Garnett Silk, another brilliant voice of conscious reggae, died in a house fire while trying to save his mother. He was only 28. His death shook the movement to its core. Silk had embodied purity of message and youthful fire. Suddenly, that flame was gone. And eyes turned to Luciano. Could he carry that weight? Could one voice sustain a movement grieving its brightest star? Grief often clarifies purpose. In 1995, Luciano released Where There Is Life on Island Jamaica, the same label that once introduced Bob Marley to the world. The symbolic weight was undeniable. It's Me Again, Jah became more than a song. It was prayer. It played in churches, in dance halls, in homes where hardship pressed heavily. The refrain felt intimate, almost confessional. Have you ever heard a song that felt less like performance and more like conversation with the divine? Luciano was not simply entertaining. He was ministering. Becoming the messenger. By 1996, the album Messenjah cemented his identity. The title was not accidental. It defined mission. Luciano did not position himself as prophet or savior. He positioned himself as conduit, a vessel through which something larger flowed. But being a messenger carries burden. Expectations multiply. Audiences demand consistency. Critics search for flaws. The industry pressures evolution or compromise. Behind the scenes, tensions grew between Luciano and Fetus Burrell. Creative differences. Business strain. The heavy machinery of fame grinding against idealism. By 1999, they parted ways. Movements are powerful, but they can fracture under pressure. Still, Luciano pressed forward. Growth, recognition, and global reach. The early 2000s marked a new phase. A New Day earned a Grammy nomination in 2002. Recognition from global institutions validated what fans already knew. Luciano's work transcended trend. Dean Fraser, now more than a collaborator, became his musical director. Together, they refined live performances into immersive experiences. Concerts were not just shows, they were gatherings. Audiences sang as if participating in collective affirmation. Yet success invites temptation. How does an artist remain rooted when the world offers elevation? How do you travel globally without losing local identity? Luciano grounded himself in discipline, meditation, reflection, family. He maintained distance from excess. He understood that credibility, once lost, is difficult to reclaim. A spiritual awakening. There is a dimension of Luciano's life less discussed publicly, a spiritual turning point that deepened his message. Raised Adventist, exposed to Rastafarian consciousness, navigating global fame, his spiritual journey was layered. During one intense period of meditation, he experienced what he later described as an awakening, an encounter that challenged conventional understandings of consciousness. Whether mystical or psychological, the experience altered him. It expanded his perspective on life and mortality. It sharpened his sense of responsibility. What happens when belief stops being inherited and becomes experiential? From that point forward, performances carried heightened urgency. Each lyric felt deliberate. Each note intentional. Trials beyond the stage. But no life of conviction escapes hardship. Luciano faced legal controversies and public scrutiny over the years. Immigration issues. Rumors. Industry politics. The spotlight can magnify imperfections. How does a messenger respond when accused, misunderstood, or targeted? He responded with music. Rather than engage in prolonged public defense, he returned to the studio. Albums continued. Collaborations expanded. He toured relentlessly across Africa, Europe, the Americas. In Ethiopia, audiences embraced him as cultural kin. In Europe, roots lovers found reassurance. In the Caribbean, elders nodded in approval. Through it all, his voice matured. It grew weathered, but richer. Loss and perseverance. In 2011, Philip "Fatus" Burrell passed away. The producer who had helped shape the Rasta Renaissance was gone. Did old tensions matter in the face of mortality? Luciano honored his former collaborators' contribution openly. Time has a way of softening conflict. Legacy eclipses disagreement. Then came personal loss. In 2022, Luciano's son, Javon, tragically passed away. The pain was unimaginable. No philosophy prepares a parent for that void. How does a man who sings hope confront private devastation? Some artists retreat permanently. Others unravel publicly. Luciano chose quiet endurance. He continued performing, though the grief was visible in his eyes. Songs about perseverance carried new depth. Audiences sensed it. Music became not just message, but therapy. The weight of integrity. Decades into his career, Luciano remains active. The industry has shifted again. Streaming algorithms, social media trends, shortened attention spans. Yet his concerts still draw multi-generational crowds. Elders who once played his cassettes now attend with grandchildren. Why does his voice still resonate? Perhaps because it was never designed to chase relevance. It was built on foundation. Roots do not panic when winds change, they hold. Luciano's story forces us to confront larger questions. Can conviction survive commercial pressure? Can spirituality coexist with global fame? Can music still function as moral compass in an era of distraction? His life suggests yes, but not without cost. The enduring voice. Listen closely to Luciano today and you hear time within it. Youthful brightness has mellowed into seasoned warmth. There is gravity now. Experience. Loss. Triumph. But the core remains unchanged. From a strict Adventist home without television, to forbidden drawings and hidden questions, to Kingston's competitive studios, to international stages, to private grief and public resilience, the arc is coherent. He never abandoned message for momentum. In an age where virality often outweighs substance, that alone feels radical. What Luciano teaches us. Luciano's journey is not only about reggae. It is about identity under negotiation, about belief under pressure, about choosing purpose over comfort. He reminds us that art can be ministry, that discipline shapes talent, that tragedy does not have to silence voice. And perhaps most importantly, he shows that legacy is not built in headlines, it is built in consistency. What shapes a man's voice? Talent? Yes. Tragedy? Certainly. But conviction, that unyielding center, may matter most. As long as Luciano sings, the question remains alive. Will we listen only for melody, or for message? And in a world that often encourages distraction, are we still willing to hear what challenges us? Luciano never promised perfection. He promised presence. A steady voice reminding us that where there is life, there is still possibility. And perhaps that is the true power of the messenger. On stage, he wasn't simply singing. He was merging body, spirit, and message. For audiences, it felt transcendent. The slow rise of a chest, the deliberate bend toward a microphone, the way his hand sketched invisible prayers in the air. People closed their eyes. Strangers held hands. In those rooms you sensed something older than applause, a communal remembering. How many artists today perform from that place of conviction rather than choreography? When reggae lost its way. By the 2000s, Luciano saw changes in reggae that troubled him. Lyrics growing more vulgar. Dance moves degrading women. DJs cutting songs short, chasing hype instead of harmony. He watched younger acts chase virality like a quick fix, trading depth for a trending beat. He spoke openly. Music should elevate, not degrade. He spoke not with the rancor of someone out of touch, but with the measured urgency of a teacher pointing back to a lesson many had forgotten. Do we have a responsibility to keep our art honest? In 2007, Jamaica awarded him the Order of Distinction for his contribution to reggae. Recognition from home carries a different weight, doesn't it? To be honored where you grew roots, where the soil remembers your earliest steps, means more than a magazine cover or foreign applause. Yet even honors can't shield you from personal tragedy. 2016. The unthinkable. On February 27, 2016, violence erupted in Kingston. Luciano's 19-year-old son, Menelik, was stabbed. He died the next day. For a man who had spent decades preaching peace, unity, and consciousness, the irony was devastating. How does a father continue singing about hope after burying his child? How can faith survive a wound that deep? Menelik was not an abstract statistic to the fans who had followed his father. He had his father's shy smile and an easy laugh that broke up the room like sunlight. They had walked beaches at dawn, watched old black-and-white movies, argued late into the night about politics and poetry. Luciano used to tell a story about teaching Menelik the chorus to one of his favorite songs and the boy answering back in a voice that cracked as it grew. That father-son recording sits in Luciano's archive like an unedited prayer. Years earlier, Luciano had spoken about his deep connection to life. Even as a child, he struggled with the idea of killing animals for food. Life, to him, was sacred. And now, his own son's life was taken. Many would retreat into silence. Luciano did the opposite. He poured grief into purpose. Each performance became a prayer that no other parent would endure the same pain. After Menelik's death, he began writing songs that read like testimonies, verses that named the streets and the systems, choruses that insisted on healing. One song starts with a simple line, "If my voice can stop one blade, then let it be strong." The message intensified, not weakened. That resilience speaks to something beyond celebrity. It speaks to calling. Does suffering break a person or refine them? Recognition and legacy. In 2023, Rolling Stone ranked Luciano among the 200 greatest singers of all time. For longtime fans, it felt overdue. Jamaica and Africa had known for decades what the wider industry was just acknowledging. He continued releasing music, including a soulful reggae interpretation of "Can't Help Falling in Love." The arrangement was minimalist, a soft organ, a gentle bass, his voice close enough to hear a breath. Critics praised the tenderness. Listeners felt something primal and human. He toured extensively across Africa, South Africa, Ghana, Malawi, where audiences welcomed him not as a visitor, but as family. In Ghana, hundreds waited at the airport with paintings and gifts. He declined heavy security at first, insisting he was low-key. But the reception overwhelmed him. It wasn't fandom, it was homecoming. He walked through colors, children pressing painted portraits into his hands. It felt ancestral. For a man who often spoke of Africa as spiritual homeland, that reception mattered. More than music. Luciano also advocated for cannabis education, not rebellion for rebellion's sake, but awareness of its historical and medicinal context. Education over legislation, he emphasized. He visited classrooms, talked with elders who remembered traditional remedies, and sat with doctors exploring therapeutic uses. It felt practical, not provocative, a way to repair misunderstandings and heal communities. He criticized the misuse of technology to glorify violence and chaos. It can build or destroy, he warned. For those of us watching the digital age reshape culture, that message resonates deeply. He worked with youth groups to teach media literacy, asking them to consider what they amplify and why. He even extended his vision into agriculture and sustainability, thinking beyond royalties toward generational stability. In a small parish in St. Anne, he helped start a community garden where young men learned to plant cassava and manage water. The harvest fed families and funded a music scholarship. Wasn't that the point of influence, to redirect resources into tomorrow? Isn't that what maturity teaches us? That legacy is more important than headlines. The fire that never went out. From a boy forbidden to own a television to a global ambassador of roots reggae, Luciano's journey is not one of overnight success. It's one of endurance. He learned the discipline of listening, of letting silence sharpen his sense of timing and truth. He faced resistance at home, pressure in the industry, the loss of peers, the murder of his son, shifts in culture, changing tastes. Yet he never abandoned the core message: righteousness, unity, spiritual awareness. In an era when many artists reinvent themselves to survive, Luciano remained anchored. That doesn't mean he stood still. His themes evolved, from spiritual devotion to political commentary to global consciousness, but the foundation never cracked. And perhaps that's the real question his life poses to us. In a world that constantly shifts, what anchors you? Is it faith, family, principle, purpose? Luciano's story reminds us that success doesn't require selling your soul. That influence doesn't demand compromise. That grief can deepen conviction instead of destroying it. For more than 3 decades, he has stood as living proof that message music still resonates, especially with those mature enough to hear it. The boy who once imagined worlds through static on a radio became a voice that carried across continents. Not because he chased fame, but because he chose purpose. And that, more than chart positions or awards, is why they still call him the Messenger.